They used to call me the glue of the company, but perhaps I was nothing more than a temporary fix for a structure that had long been rotting from within. That spring in Palo Alto carried a warmth tinged with fragility, and I still remember the way sunlight filtered through the office window the morning I first walked into MindSpark Media, a tech startup specializing in interactive AI-driven advertising. My name is Maya Rudolph, Content Strategy Director, 38 years old, not quite young enough for reckless ambition, but not old enough to abandon my dreams either. After nearly 2 decades navigating New York and Chicago, I returned to California to begin again from zero, drawn in by an old friend's invitation and the hope that I had finally found a place where I could build something that would last. The work at MindSpark was never easy, but it was inspiring. It was the kind of place where brainstorming sessions ran long into the night, where even the most absurd ideas were given a chance, where I believed that emotional marketing was more than just a hollow catchphrase. I had written campaigns that made people cry, that touched hearts, that built lasting relationships between brands and audiences, not through gimmicks, but through authenticity and emotion, through the very things that machines could never replace. We called it real connection. The CEO of MindSpark was a rising star in the startup world. His name was Graham Doyle, 42 years old, sharp and quick on his feet, someone who always made you feel like he saw what others couldn't. We had worked together in New York years ago, and it was he who convinced me to leave a stable job to join him at MindSpark. I remember what he said as we signed the contract in a small coffee shop off Castro Street, Maya. This time, we're doing it differently. No politics, no backstabbing, just ideas and real values. And I believed him. I believed that after years of playing the agency game, hiding behind diplomacy, I had finally found a place where I could lead with truth. My team was young, brilliant, and full of promise. But it was me who crafted the core strategies, who defined the brand identity for our first major clients, who stayed awake 3 nights in a row to save a project when a key partner threatened to pull out at the last minute. I never complained. I believed in the mission. I believed in the team. But there were signs, small, scattered signals I might have noticed if I hadn't been so sure. Moments when Graham would forget to include me in high-level meetings. Times I'd be replaced at client pitches by someone not even listed in our formal structure. Emails forwarded to the wrong address, in which my own ideas were being dissected and repackaged under someone else's name. I started to see Harper Quinn's name, a young product manager, appearing in internal reports alongside performance metrics that clearly came from my team's work. Harper had a knack for pleasing the executive board. She was quick, knew who to flatter, who to avoid, and she was especially good at keeping Graham close. Still, I didn't think they would go this far. When MindSpark entered negotiations for a Series B investment with a major Boston-based fund, I was asked to prepare a comprehensive long-term communication strategy. I spent 3 weeks on it, postponed every personal meeting, worked late into the night, and delivered a 47-page plan detailing everything from brand positioning to crisis management, a 2-year roadmap, and methods to turn user data into personalized experience. I presented it to Graham in a private meeting. He said, "This is exactly what we need for the next phase. Maya, you've always been the heart of this creative team." But 3 days later, I was removed from the investor meeting without explanation. The unease grew when I saw Harper leaving the building that day. Unable to hide her triumphant smile, I started asking questions. Then one of the engineers, a quiet friend of mine, whispered to me in the office kitchen that my plan had indeed been presented, but Harper's name had been on the opening slide. I didn't want to believe it. I needed proof. Then one day, a mistakenly shared PowerPoint showed up in the shared inbox. I opened it, and there it was, the exact same opening, the same wording, the same commas. Slide 3 displayed a photo of Harper, with the headline "Vision and Brand Identity" by Harper Quinn. My blood ran cold. I gathered everything and went straight to Graham, still hoping it was a misunderstanding, still believing he'd said it right. But when I knocked on his door, the look he gave me wasn't one of a colleague. It was the look of... 3 days later, I received a termination notice signed by legal. The reason stated personnel restructuring following successful funding. I stared at the red stamp, hands trembling not from fear, but from the quiet pain of betrayal. I left MindSpark on a gray afternoon, carrying only a small box of memories, a few framed photos, some notebooks, and a mug printed with the words, "Build with empathy," a gift from the day we launched our first product. No one came to see me off. No farewell email. 1 year of dedication, dozens of campaigns, sleepless nights, and the trust I had placed so completely in them gone without a trace. As I stepped out of the building, I caught my reflection in the glass. My eyes weren't red, but they were hollow. I wasn't angry anymore, just empty. The real wound wasn't having my work stolen. It was the cold, calculated erasure of trust. I had thought this was the place where I'd build lasting connections, the last company of my career, the one where I'd pour everything I had left. And yet this was the place that shut the door on me with silence and precision. That night, I sat alone in my small Mountain View apartment, my coffee long gone cold. The sympathy texts from a few coworkers only made the silence louder. I opened my laptop, meaning to delete every folder labeled MindSpark, but I paused when I saw an old file named First Pitch MindSpark AV1. It was the original plan, the one I'd written from the heart. It was proof of what I had built, what I had dreamed, what I had risked. I pressed enter and watched the file load slowly, and in that moment, I wasn't angry. I just had one quiet question echo in my mind. If they could take away the work I did, then what could I take back? I don't remember exactly how long it took to climb out of that space between doubt and surrender. But I remember one morning when sunlight cut through the curtains and I stood up without having to force myself. There's something strange that happens after betrayal, especially when it comes from a place where you once placed your deepest trust. First comes the anger, then the grief, then the disorientation. But if you're clear-headed enough not to let the pain define you, you eventually reach a different layer of emotion clarity. I began with the smallest things, cleaning out my laptop, removing every app linked to the old company, erasing recurring meetings, organizing files. That ritual of sorting gave me a quiet sense of momentum, like I was preparing for something that no longer belonged to those who had turned their backs on me. And the truth is, I wasn't doing it to get back at them. I was doing it to reclaim myself. 2 weeks after leaving MindSpark, I moved temporarily to Santa Clara to stay with Elise Garner, a college friend who worked as a software engineer at a fintech firm. Elise didn't ask many questions. She let me sleep for days, then left a sticky note on the kitchen counter that read, "If you're ready to talk, there's coffee." That evening, I told her everything. I left nothing out, not even the part where Graham looked me in the eye and called my creativity a product of collective effort. Elise wasn't surprised. She had walked out of 2 startups herself because she couldn't tolerate the kind of vague management that ran on bias and backdoor politics. But instead of comforting me, she asked one simple question, Maya. If they turned your ideas into money, do you think you could build something else from scratch? But this time, for yourself, I stayed silent for a long time. It was probably the first moment since I left the company that I truly imagined building something again, not to fight them, but to prove that the real value inside me had never disappeared. I started by reopening old projects, reviewing campaigns that had been shelved, and revisiting ideas that had once been dismissed as off-brand. One night, I reread client feedback from my last campaign, and a single line stopped me in my tracks. "Thank you for telling our story in a way no ad ever has." I opened my laptop and created a new folder called Try Again. Over the next few weeks, I buried myself in research. I read case studies on digital transformation in marketing, examined startup models built on emotional value. And one thing became painfully clear: there was still a massive gap between technology and humanity. People were building mood-tracking apps and mental health chatbots, but few truly understood how to tell stories that made others feel seen. I didn't want to start another ad agency. I wanted to build a platform, a space where brands could tell their real stories using their own data, powered by AI but grounded in humanity, a system that listened before it tried to persuade. The only problem was that I had nothing but the idea: no office, no team, no capital, and least of all, no credibility, especially after being labeled as someone who left due to misalignment with company vision. I began drafting a proposal, breaking the plan into 3 stages. I named the project Lumora, which means light that comes from within. Elise helped me build the first prototype, just a simple browser extension that could analyze the emotional tone of a paragraph and suggest how to shift it toward a more positive direction while preserving its original voice. We tested it by inputting old content from past campaigns, and the early results gave me a flicker of hope. I didn't pitch for funding right away. I sent the prototype to a few friends in the industry I had worked with before, keeping my name off the product, simply asking for feedback. The responses were encouraging. One content director from a major online fashion brand in Los Angeles even asked if she could see a live demo. I knew that if I wanted to move forward, I had to re-enter the market I had left in silence. I had to show my face to the very people who once saw me in MindSpark, but now only heard about me in whispers. I started signing up for small networking events in San Jose, Mountain View, and even San Francisco. No one recognized me. The same people who once clapped me on the back at conferences now passed by without a glance. But I wasn't there to be remembered. I was there to learn how to begin again. I took notes on how new startups pitched, how they presented their solutions, how they crafted their language to define a vision. I watched instead of speaking. I relearned how to talk about a product without dragging my past into the room. Each night, I returned to the small guest room in Elise's home, revising my pitch deck, adjusting financial projections, refining my core message. I wasn't doing it to prove anyone wrong. I was doing it to prove that I still had it in me to start over. This time, no one would be able to take it from me. Then one day, I received an email from Women in Innovation informing me that Lumora had been selected as one of 12 promising projects to receive direct mentorship from female investors across California. I had submitted the application the month before, holding on to the slimmest hope that someone might see Lumora's potential. They saw it, and they chose it. That night, I walked alone down El Camino Real, headphones in, listening to my own voice from a recorded pitch practice. In that moment, I didn't feel like I was coming back from bitterness. I felt like I had never deserved to be pushed out in the first place. I wasn't trying to win so someone else could lose. I wanted to win to prove that what I had built before was never an accident. My ideas, my storytelling, the human value I had given to others, those weren't things anyone could erase. But even then, I could sense the tide beginning to shift. Someone had already noticed I was back. I used to think that people who stole credit would always win in this world, at least long enough to convince themselves that manipulation was a survival skill. But maybe I had underestimated the quiet force of consequences that eventually turned back on them. The first week of the mentorship program at Women in Innovation passed quickly, and I soon realized how different this space was from the rushed pitching circuits I had known before. Here, no one cared where you used to work or how many people knew your name. The only question that mattered was whether what you were building truly needed to exist. I presented Lumora in a private session with two veteran investors, one of whom was Karen Lynn, founder of a media platform supporting female-led startups. Karen asked a question that made me pause. What would you do if another company deliberately copied this idea? I looked her in the eye and said without hesitation that they could replicate the technical layer, but they couldn't recreate the emotion unless they truly understood why it needed to exist. Karen nodded and moved on, but I knew she had just circled my name in her mind. 2 days later, I learned that Graham Doyle would be the keynote speaker at the Future Narrative Conference in San Francisco, a major gathering of leaders in digital media and artificial intelligence. What caught my attention wasn't just his name, but the title of his talk, Redefining Emotional Marketing Through AI, the MindSpark Story. I sat frozen after reading it. Some things you think you've moved on from find a way to return just as you're starting to regain your footing. I checked the event listing and noticed that 3 of the mentors from my program were also speaking at different panels. This wasn't coincidence anymore. MindSpark was moving into a full-scale publicity phase, and if they were using ideas from my old project the way they had before, I might be forced to watch my own vision retold in someone else's voice. But this time, I wasn't staying silent. I emailed the organizers, requesting to attend as a guest observer, and attached a demo link of Lumora. Within a day, I received a reply from the head of content inviting me to speak in a breakout session titled Emotion and Data, Navigating the Boundary Between Technology and Humanity. I knew it wasn't the main stage, not the spotlight, but it was a chance to tell the real story, my story, to people who had only heard a version of it. On the day of the event, I arrived early with a USB drive and a heart ready for anything. Graham showed up late, surrounded by new assistants and team members, including Harper Quinn. She walked past me without acknowledgement, or maybe pretending not to recognize me. I caught Graham glancing briefly at the breakout room stage while I was adjusting my slides. His gaze stopped on me for just a second before moving on. I didn't need recognition from them. I only needed to speak the truth. In my presentation, I didn't mention MindSpark or any individual by name. I spoke about designing a tool that listens like a person does, not just analyzing but interpreting, responding, and shaping narrative in a way that connects instead of manipulates. I shared early test results, user feedback, and the countless trial and error attempts to find a balance between data and genuine feeling. When I finished, the room broke into applause without any cue, but what stayed with me was the look from an investor named Carl Spencer, who later approached me and said just one sentence, "If you're raising capital, I want to be the first to know." I left the room not feeling triumphant, but affirmed, but the first twist hadn't finished unfolding. That night, I received an anonymous message with a screenshot of an internal email from MindSpark. It contained a campaign proposal submitted by Harper Quinn to their external relations team, and its content nearly mirrored the core elements of the Lumora demo I had presented the day before. I read every word, my hands going cold not out of fear of being copied, but from the realization that they hadn't stopped. They were still using my work as if it belonged to them. But what they didn't know was that I had anticipated this. The public demo I had shown only revealed about 60% of Lumora's full structure. The remaining components, especially the emotional feedback filter system, were part of a proprietary module registered under the name of a new company Elise and I had recently incorporated, Lumora Labs, LLC. 2 days later, a LinkedIn post by MindSpark appeared, showing Harper standing in front of a slide introducing a new technology called Echo Emotion AI. The post was widely shared, and I read through every comment with a calm I hadn't expected. Not anger, just the quiet certainty of watching a fire consume the one who lit it. Meanwhile, Karen Lynn surprised me with an invitation to a private pitching session with 3 angel investors in Oakland. It was held in a quiet co-working space, with only 6 people in the room and a simple slide. I introduced Lumora not with data points, but with a story about someone who had once had her work stolen, been pushed out of the game, but still believed that real value would eventually find its place if you were patient enough to hold on. The atmosphere in the room shifted within the first 3 minutes. An investor named Lee Morrison closed her laptop and said, "I don't need more slides. I want to hear your expansion plan." 3 weeks later, Lumora Labs secured its first investment round of $350,000 from 3 private investors. Around the same time, an AI analysis report by an independent research group published a review of Echo Emotion AI with the headline, "A Half-Built Technology Lacking Emotional Core." The article criticized the gap between the product's promise and the user experience, concluding that it appears to have been copied from an unfinished blueprint. I wasn't the source behind the piece, but I suspected someone inside MindSpark had started to see cracks in the story. And when Graham appeared on a podcast, sounding tired and evasive when asked about Echo Emotion's core engine, I knew the creative mask they had worn was starting to break, but I wasn't done yet. I knew I was stepping into the most critical phase, and this time, I wouldn't be staying backstage. I don't know the exact moment I became truly ready to return, but I remember clearly that something inside me had shifted. It was no longer the sting of betrayal, nor simply a desire to be seen. What I felt was a kind of stillness, a focused clarity no longer tethered to recognition or to any name beyond my own. Securing investment for Lumora Labs was a necessary milestone, but what truly made me feel ready was a conversation I hadn't planned for, one that happened on a quiet afternoon while I was working in a familiar cafe. A woman walked in, moving quickly but with hesitant eyes. She looked around and stopped when she saw me. It was Harper Quinn. No dramatic makeup this time, her face tired and stripped of the usual polish. She asked if she could sit, skipping small talk and pretense. "I know you could sue," Harper said, eyes fixed on the tea in her hands. "Your tech, your approach, even your slides from the conference. We took too much." I didn't respond right away. Some truths, when spoken aloud, bring a strange lightness, but also reveal fractures in the side that took them. I asked why she was telling me this now. She didn't answer directly. She spoke of the pressure Graham had put on her, of the projects she was forced to take credit for even when she didn't understand them, and of the growing unease she felt as an incomplete version of herself was paraded as the company's new creative face. "I'm not here to apologize," she said. "I just want to walk away before this goes too far." I looked at her for a long moment and asked quietly, "Do you think it was better for MindSpark that I disappeared entirely?" Harper didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. The conversation ended with her saying just one thing: "I think you're going to do something bigger than they ever imagined." That night, I sat in front of Lumora's planning board and rewrote the entire expansion strategy. I no longer confined the vision to content or branding. I began imagining an open platform, one where small businesses could easily access emotional intelligence tools, where content creators could personalize user experience without massive technical teams. I wrote for 2 days straight. Elise watched me with concern and asked if I was keeping up. I just smiled. For the first time in months, I felt like I was setting the pace, no longer driven by fear or anyone else's expectations. The following week, I presented the revised plan to the investors and received unexpectedly strong support. Not only did they agree to double their commitment, but they also introduced me to a strategic partner from a user data platform based in Seattle. Their representative, a woman named Rachel Mills, told me she had seen my talk at Future Narrative and believed that my vision for emotional marketing could redefine the entire industry. Rachel sat across from me in a newly rented office in Palo Alto and proposed a partnership that wasn't just technical, but would provide shared analytics infrastructure to help Lumora accelerate its pre-launch phase. It was a clear turning point, not because of resources, but because I was finally finding allies who didn't care where I came from, only what I was building. Meanwhile, MindSpark began facing growing scrutiny over intellectual property. A former employee leaked part of an internal email thread that directly confirmed the reuse of elements from Lumora's demo. The story spread rapidly across tech forums, forcing Graham to call an emergency press conference to clarify misleading claims. But people in the industry already understood that even one exposed incident was too many for a company selling creativity. The term betrayal started appearing in press articles, not to describe me, but to reflect how MindSpark's own employees felt after learning that the innovation they celebrated had come from someone quietly pushed out. Graham no longer inspired the way he used to. His public talks drew increasing criticism. I didn't celebrate any of it. I simply acknowledged it as part of a process that no longer needed my intervention to unfold. I spent the rest of that month building Lumora's first beta version, inviting 10 small businesses from various sectors to try it out. Their feedback all pointed to one thing: they felt the platform spoke their language. I printed one line from a nonprofit content creator's comment for the first time. "This tool doesn't force me to write for the audience. It helps me tell a story the audience wants to hear." I taped that quote to the wall of our new office as a reminder that I was moving in the right direction. I knew I wasn't the winner yet, but I no longer feared losing. Once you've hit bottom and risen through nothing but your own breath, you stop needing anyone to measure your comeback for you. In the end, I sent a short email to Harper. Just 2 lines: "I won't sue, but if you truly want to walk away, start by refusing to put your name on something that isn't yours." I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need her thanks or her regret. I only needed to know that this time I was returning with clear eyes, without the need for validation from those who once saw me as replaceable. I updated my LinkedIn profile picture to the official Lumora Labs logo, a simple mark. 2 lines of light intersecting to form a droplet, symbolizing the convergence of data and feeling. Below it, I wrote a new title founder, Lumora Labs, where emotion becomes technology. It wasn't just a tagline. It was a signal that I was back, not as someone discarded, but as someone beginning a completely new chapter with the very things they once thought were my weakness. One thing I've learned through all of this is that a comeback doesn't need to be loud. You don't need validation. You don't need those who once doubted you to bow their heads in apology. And you don't need a stage to expose what was unfair. You just need to let the results speak. On the day Lumora Labs officially launched its beta to the public, I sat in our small office watching the dashboard as the first users explored the platform in real time. A travel startup used the emotional content feature to craft tour descriptions that felt genuinely inviting. A nonprofit used the compact version of Lumora to turn dry financial reports into compelling fundraising stories. And notably, a media company in Atlanta decided to integrate Lumora across their entire content production system after just 1 week of trial. I didn't post any flashy announcements, didn't appear in the press, didn't attend tech events to flaunt numbers. I focused solely on doing the work, keeping the team lean but sharp, and ensuring that every new feature stayed rooted in a single core philosophy. Emotion is the only thing you can't automate unless you understand it completely. A few weeks later, MindSpark hosted a product launch for their commercial version of Echo Emotion, hoping to recover their image after mounting industry criticism. I didn't pay attention to the event until a friend sent me a video clip from the launch. In it, Graham Doyle was introducing a feature for simulating emotion based on user feedback, but during the live demo, the system responded with phrases completely off tone, leaving the audience visibly confused. A moment later, the system froze entirely. The person recording couldn't suppress a quiet laugh, and the video ended with a close-up of Graham's strained expression as he tried to recover the moment. The glitch wasn't catastrophic, but for a product that once promised to redefine AI-driven marketing, it was a hard stumble. Just a week later, a leading tech publication published an investigative piece about internal unrest at MindSpark, revealing that at least 3 senior employees had resigned within a month due to leadership conflicts and philosophical misalignment. Graham was described as a CEO who no longer commands the trust of the team he once inspired. I didn't share the article, didn't comment on it, didn't forward it to anyone. I simply opened an email from Rachel Mills, Lumora's strategic partner, who wrote that several former MindSpark clients had reached out to her to switch services. No agreement lasts forever, and I felt no satisfaction in seeing people return who once chose to walk away. What I felt was lightness, a kind of weightlessness that only comes when you no longer view yourself as the victim. I saw Harper one last time at a closed event for female founders, where she wasn't representing any company, but attending as someone who had stepped back from the media world to realign her perspective. She approached me first, without excuse or explanation. We spoke as 2 people who had once stood on opposite sides, but now shared the view from beyond that boundary. When she asked how I had managed to stay composed through it all, I answered slowly. I used to think success was the best revenge. But now I believe real success is when you're no longer ruled by someone else's emotions. Harper nodded and said nothing more. The next month, I was invited to the main stage at Seed Talks in Austin, not to present new tech, but to tell a story of building something from failure. I stood before nearly 500 people, sharing how I had gone from being cut out of my own idea to rebuilding everything from scratch, never mentioning the old company by name. I spoke only of lessons, of moments I nearly gave up, of the times I had to choose between reacting out of emotion or walking with purpose. I ended with a single question: between proving your worth to them and proving to yourself that you were never lost, which one would you choose first? The room went silent for a few seconds before applause filled the space, louder and longer than I ever expected. I didn't need them to clap for my story. I needed them to question their own. I knew Graham was still trying to keep MindSpark afloat, still clinging to the part of the market unaware of what had happened, but gradually, The echo of clients migrating to Lumora began to build into a wave. No one made public accusations, but word spread of a different kind of working experience. They told each other that Lumora was a place where conversations happened instead of impositions. They said we were where emotion is encoded with respect. I printed that phrase and placed it in a lightbox by the entrance to our new office, not to remind our clients, but to remind my team and myself every day. I never believed this journey would end with someone else's collapse. But when you're no longer standing in the shadow of those who pushed you aside, you finally see how small they look without the borrowed light. The ones who betrayed you don't need punishment. Sometimes, losing the trust and energy of someone who once gave their all is the deepest form of consequence. And you, if you have the patience not to respond with bitterness, will see yourself grow right through the wound. Sometimes I think back to that first night after I was let go, sitting alone in my apartment with a cold cup of coffee and the question if they could take my work. What could I take back? Now I know I've reclaimed far more than what was lost. I've taken back control over my emotions, retrieved a voice that had been dismissed, and above all, reclaimed the freedom to define how I want to be treated. Someone once asked me if I would have taken a different path to avoid the pain. I didn't answer at the time, but now I think maybe it was that pain that forced me to stop and see what I had let others decide for me, and if not for that push, I might never have known what it feels like to rebuild a world without asking anyone's permission.